What's going on, everyone? This is Sarah coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And today we're going to be discussing the Curt Schilling trade, which occurred on July 25th, the year 2000. Now, before I get into the video here, I just want to say that the Phillies did acquire Curt Schilling in a trade from Houston prior to the 1992 season for essentially nothing, and he had a 36.8 WAR with the Phillies over 8.5 seasons prior to this trade. The trade wasn't substantial enough to actually include here. It would have been a couple no names for Schilling. So now that that's out of the way, his WAR does not count towards the Phillies WAR in this trade. But without further ado, let's jump into this trade. Now, this is a trade that sees Curt Schilling obviously leave Philadelphia, getting shipped to the Arizona Diamondbacks in exchange for 4 players. And so we'll start with Schilling, of course, going to Arizona. So Arizona with Schilling. Curt Schilling was an electric, elite starting pitcher for the team for 3.5 seasons. Now, he was a runner-up for the NL Cy Young Award 2 different seasons, losing both times to his teammate, Randy Johnson. Yes, the Diamondbacks had Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling together. Pretty amazing, pretty spectacular. And he was a key piece during the Diamondbacks World Series run in 2001 when they defeated the New York Yankees. Really major piece. He was a 2-time All-Star for Arizona. However, after some time, he ends up getting traded, and he's traded to the Boston Red Sox for 4 players himself, and those players are relief pitcher Jorge De La Rosa, pitcher Casey Fossum, relief pitcher Brandon Lyon, and outfielder Mike Goss. How did these 4 do in Arizona? Well, so we'll start with Jorge De La Rosa, and Jorge De La Rosa ends up getting traded before he makes his MLB appearance. And he is traded in this big boy trade. So this trade, if you were around my age, you know a lot of these guys. If you're younger than me, you don't know a lot of these guys. So the Diamondbacks would acquire first baseman Richie Sexson, relief pitcher Shane Nance, and outfielder Nucci Varner from Milwaukee in exchange for 6 players in the aforementioned Jorge De La Rosa, infielder Craig Counsell, pitcher Chris Capuano, catcher Chad Muller, first baseman Lyle Overbay, and second baseman Junior Spivey. So, of course, we'll get back to Milwaukee's haul there. For Arizona, so Richie Sexson was actually the big player in this trade, and he only appeared in 23 games due to shoulder injuries, which really just kind of soured the whole trade for Arizona. And he ends up walking after that season. He did decent in 23 games, but again, he was supposed to be the big return in this big trade. Shane Nance, he struggled over 1 season with the Diamondbacks before he ended up, being waived. And Nucci Varner never made the big leagues. Now we'll go back to this trade here. And Casey Fossum. So Casey Fossum had an inconsistent season, which more favored the bad than the good. And he himself ends up getting traded to the Tampa Bay, at the time, Devil Rays, in exchange for an outfielder, Jose Cruz Jr. So Jose Cruz Jr., he dealt with injuries and he struggled when he was healthy. So the Diamondbacks effectively gave up on him, and they traded him to Boston in exchange for a pair of minor leaguers and relief pitcher Kyle Bono and infielder Kenny Perez. Now, Bono and Perez, neither one ever made the big leagues. Very minor trade here, but was worth mentioning. So after that, we get to Mike Goss here, and he also never made the big leagues. Lastly, we have Brandon Lyon. And Lyon had a solid 4 years in Arizona, which included a brief stint as a closer before he himself left the Diamondbacks via free agency. So all in all, not that impressive of a haul, excluding Schilling for Arizona. But how did Philadelphia do? Well, Philadelphia got 4 players, and they were first baseman Travis Lee and a trio of pitchers with regular pitcher Vincent Padilla and regular pitcher Nelson Figueroa, along with a starting pitcher in Omar Dal. So how did these 4 do? Well, we'll start with Travis Lee, and Travis Lee was okay over 2.5 seasons before the team ended up essentially acquiring another first baseman, and he ends up walking via free agency because he said there's no point in me staying. But he was okay. Padilla, he was a good pitcher for the Phillies for 5 seasons. Wasn't elite. He did make an all-star game, and then he had a pair of injury-plagued seasons in his last 2 years in Philadelphia before he himself gets traded to the Texas Rangers in exchange for pitcher Ricardo Rodriguez. And Rodriguez was released by the Phillies before he played a game for the parent club. So that was a bad trade for Philadelphia. As for the other two that they got in this trade, so Omar Dahl, he had an okay season and a half in Philadelphia before he walked in free agency. And last but not least, Figueroa, he had an average season before he was waived. So obviously Philadelphia didn't get a great return for Curt Schilling. But how did everyone else do in this trade when they made their trades with Philadelphia and Arizona, respectively? We'll start with Boston, and Boston's in two separate trades. We'll start with Jose Cruz Jr., because that's the easier one here. He struggled mightily over a couple of weeks, and then he was waived. So he was just not good when he played in the big leagues. He struggled immensely. And, of course, Curt Schilling. So Curt Schilling had a strong 4 seasons in Boston, and then he ends up retiring. And he's an interesting story when it comes to the Hall of Fame. That'll be another day. I don't want to get into that one today. He won 2 World Series with Boston, obviously 04 and 07. And then he was a one-time All-Star for the team. We all know the story of the bloody sock. I discussed the story of the bloody sock in the history of the Boston Red Sox video. If you haven't seen that already, you can always check that one out. You'd have to go about towards the end of that video to get that, but Curt Schilling is the man behind the bloody sock. Tampa Bay with Casey Fossum here. So he was an average starter over 2.5 years before he got released. He wasn't great, but he was good enough for a rebuilding franchise to keep for a couple years to eat some innings. So Texas with Vincent Padilla. So he had a decent, albeit controversial, 3.5-year stint in Texas before he was DFA'd. Now, why did I say controversial? Well, he would often be throwing at opponents, and he did cause a brawl. So that makes you a controversial figure if you cause a brawl. Last but not least, we have Milwaukee. And Milwaukee got a decent haul with these players. So, of course, we'll start with Jorge De La Rosa. He spent 2.5 years bouncing between the minors and the majors for Milwaukee. And when he was in the big leagues, he didn't do that good. So he ends up getting traded away. Now, of course, they weren't one of the main 2 teams in this trade, Philadelphia and Arizona, so we don't discuss that trade. Craig Counsell, he would have 1 decent season before he would walk from the team. Now, as of today, the recording of this video, he is still the manager of the Brewers after the 2020 season, and he's expected to remain the manager of the Brewers. I don't see, unless some big scandal comes out, he'll be the manager of the Brewers. So it's just something cool. You have to wonder if that 1 year he spent in Milwaukee really got to him. Chris Capuano, he spent 7 years in the organization for the team. And he would spend 5 of those years in the big leagues. And more importantly, he was a one-time All-Star. So, pretty impressive. Chad Mueller, he had 2.5 rough years. And he was more bad on offense than defense. He was more of a defensive-minded catcher. Offensively, he was bad. And he ends up essentially getting traded for, quote, cash considerations, unquote, which is essentially the nice way of saying getting traded for nothing. Lyle Overbay, he was a fan favorite for 2 seasons before being traded. And Junior Spivey, he was okay for a year and a half before he himself was also traded. So that's what these teams get you. So that was the Curt Schilling trade. So who won, judging by WAR? Well, it's pretty obvious. Arizona with a 25.2 WAR. Again, that's less than the total WAR that Curt Schilling gave them, which meant they should have just hung on to Curt Schilling. Philadelphia had a respectable 10.0 WAR, but if they could have hung on to Schilling, they would have definitely liked it. Maybe they would have competed a little earlier. Probably not. But it's just interesting to think about it. Boston got a very decent 17.5 WAR. Again, all of that came from Curt Schilling. So Curt Schilling all but swung these trades in the favor of Arizona, Boston, and even Philadelphia, who, like I said, they got a 36.8 WAR from their original trade. Tampa Bay gets a negative 0.7 WAR. Texas gets a 4.2 WAR. And last but not least, Milwaukee gets a 10.6 WAR, mostly coming from Chris Capuano. So, interesting stuff. That was the Curt Schilling trade. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day.